I created a business and went through all the events with it, both failures and success. But at a family gathering, my parents called it family legacy and asked for 50% of it. Hey Reddit, I'm Alex, 33 now, but this story started almost a decade ago. It's been a wild ride full of stress, setbacks, and relentless effort. Looking back, I'm amazed I survived it all. Here's how it went down. I was 25 when I decided to start my own business. At the time, I had no savings, no family support, and no safety net. My parents worked hard but struggled financially, so I knew I'd have to figure it all out on my own. I'd always dreamed of being my own boss, creating something from scratch, and building a better life. I chose e-commerce because it was booming, and it seemed like the right path. But there was one massive problem. I had no money to start. I researched for weeks, eventually deciding to take out loans. I walked into every bank I could find, pitching my plan. Most loan officers barely let me finish before turning me down. One even told me I'd drown in the industry. Finally, one bank took a chance on me, sort of. They approved me for 3 loans, but the interest rates were sky high. I didn't hesitate. I signed the papers, knowing I'd just taken on over $100,000 in debt. It was terrifying, but I was ready to fight for my dream. The first year was brutal. I worked from 5 a.m. to midnight, every single day. My apartment doubled as my office, a cramped studio with stacks of inventory shoved against the walls. The smell of cardboard and packing tape was constant. I didn't have money for luxuries, or even basics. My diet consisted of instant noodles and clearance bin groceries. One winter, I couldn't afford to heat my place properly. I'd wear layers and sit under a blanket, fingers numb as I worked at my second-hand desk. There was no fallback. My parents couldn't help financially, and my friends were all broke, too. Failure wasn't an option. After about 6 months, things started to change. I'd been running ads on a shoestring budget when one of my products, a fitness gadget, suddenly started selling. Orders came in faster than I'd expected. It felt like my hard work was paying off. But then disaster struck. My main supplier went out of business without warning. I had thousands of back-ordered items and angry customers demanding refunds. I scrambled to find a new supplier and ended up paying double for replacements. It wiped out my profits and pushed me further into debt. The stress was unbearable. I started getting stomach ulcers from skipping meals and drinking too much coffee. I lost weight, and friends told me I looked like a ghost. I didn't have time for a social life, let alone dating. My world revolved around work, and every small mistake felt like the end of the world. After 3 years of grinding, I made a bold decision. I noticed a growing demand for eco-friendly home goods and decided to pivot my business entirely. It was risky, but I poured everything into the switch, researching suppliers, designing a new brand, and building a professional-looking website. It worked. Sales started climbing steadily, and for the first time, I wasn't just scraping by. I was making a profit. I hired a small team to handle logistics, giving me time to focus on strategy and growth. Hey Reddit, it's Alex again. If you've read my earlier post, you know how much effort I've put into building my business. This is about the moment I realized my family saw things very differently than I did. And it all started at a gathering that should have been just a regular family celebration. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon when my parents, Jack and Linda, invited the extended family to their backyard for a barbecue. The occasion was my cousin Emily's graduation. Our family gatherings were usually full of energy, kids running around, aunts gossiping, uncles arguing over sports. I arrived late because of work, as usual, juggling last-minute emails on my phone as I walked into the yard. My mom greeted me immediately, her usual cheerful self. She handed me a plate of food and told me to relax for once. I tried, but my mind was already halfway back at work. These gatherings always made me feel like an outsider. Everyone else seemed so carefree, while my thoughts were filled with shipping deadlines and inventory shortages. When the meal wrapped up, my dad stood up with his beer in hand and tapped it with a spoon to get everyone's attention. All right, everyone, listen up. Linda, and I have something exciting to share with you all. The chatter died down as everyone turned toward him, curious. I had no idea what was coming. My dad smiled broadly and said, "We're so proud of Alex and everything he's accomplished. And we're excited to announce that his business will now be part of our family legacy." something we can all cherish and grow together. There was applause and cheers, but I sat frozen. Family legacy? Cherish and grow together? I couldn't wrap my head around what he was saying. This was the business I'd built from scratch, through years of struggle and sacrifice, and suddenly, it was being treated as some kind of communal asset. When the noise settled, I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady. "Thanks, Dad," I said, "but I think there's been a misunderstanding. The business isn't a family legacy. It's something I built on my own. I took the risks, put in the hours, and dealt with the challenges. This is my livelihood." My dad's smile wavered for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "Of course, son, and we're all so proud of you. But now that it's successful, it's time to think about the future. Imagine what we could do together. Your siblings and cousins could help out. We could make it even bigger." My chest tightened. "Dad, this isn't a group project. No one else was there when I was working 16-hour days or struggling to pay the bills. This isn't something I can just hand over to the family." My sister Megan chimed in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Oh, come on, Alex. It's not like anyone's asking you to give it up. Dad just means we could all contribute. Maybe I could handle marketing or customer service." I turned to her, incredulous. "Megan, you've never shown any interest in what I do. You don't even know what products I sell." Her arms crossed defensively. "That's not fair." I didn't want to interfere, but now that it's doing well, why shouldn't the family benefit? "You wouldn't even have this drive if it weren't for Mom and Dad raising you the way they did." My cousin Eric, always eager to stir the pot, laughed and said, "Yeah, Alex, don't act like you did it all on your own. Remember how Grandpa gave you advice when you were starting out? Family's always been there for you." "Advice doesn't pay the bills, Eric," I snapped. "I appreciate Grandpa's wisdom, but let's not rewrite history. He didn't put up any money, and he didn't take on any of the risk." Eric shrugged. "Still, you're acting like you're too good for the family now." At this point, my dad stepped back in, his voice firm. "That's enough arguing. Alex, no one's trying to take anything from you. We're just saying it's time to think bigger. What's the point of success if you can't share it with the people who love you?" Then my Aunt Karen spoke up, her words stopping me cold. "Actually, Alex, your parents did help you more than you think. Who do you think paid off that second loan you defaulted on?" I stared at her, stunned. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice sharp. My mom looked away, her expression uncomfortable. "We didn't want to tell you, sweetheart. You were under so much stress, and we didn't want you to feel like you owed us. But when you were struggling that first year, we stepped in and paid off one of your loans." My dad added, "It was for your own good. We couldn't stand to see you fail." I was floored. "So you went behind my back, paid off my debt without telling me, and now you're using that to justify calling my business a family legacy? Do you have any idea how insulting that is?" My mom's eyes filled with tears. "We just wanted to help, Alex. We didn't mean to upset you." "I appreciate the help," I said, my voice softer now. "But that doesn't mean you get to rewrite the story of how this business was built. I worked for this. I sacrificed for this. It's my dream, not a family project." The mood had shifted completely. What had started as a celebration had turned into a standoff. My parents were hurt, my siblings were frustrated, and I felt completely alone. I left the barbecue that day feeling like the ground had been pulled out from under me. "Hey Reddit, it's Alex again. If you've been following my posts, you already know that things with my family have been spiraling. What began as a dispute about boundaries escalated quickly. My parents, Jack and Linda, decided they deserved a share in my business because of the sacrifices they made raising me. What followed has been a whirlwind of manipulation, gossip, and family tension. It all started with a phone call from my mom. "Alex, we need to talk," she said sharply. I could tell right away this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. "We've been thinking," she began. "Your father and I made so many sacrifices to raise you. It's only fair that we get to share in your success." I didn't even know how to respond at first. "Sacrifices?" I repeated. "Mom, what are you talking about? You think it was easy raising you," she snapped. "Your father worked overtime for years. I stayed up countless nights helping you with school projects, making sure you had everything you needed. And let's not forget the loan we paid off for you." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Mom, I've always appreciated what you and Dad did for me. But raising me was your responsibility as parents, not an investment you're cashing out now. Her tone turned icy. So that's how you see it? After everything we gave up for you, you're just going to shut us out? The calls didn't stop there. My parents started telling other relatives that I'd forgotten my roots. Soon, I was getting unsolicited advice from people I hadn't spoken to in years. My Uncle Bob called me out of the blue, saying, "Alex, don't you think it's time you showed some gratitude? Family is everything." I tried to explain the situation, but he interrupted. "Perception matters, Alex. Right now, you're looking pretty selfish." It was infuriating. The narrative my parents were spreading was making me look like some ungrateful jerk, and no one seemed interested in hearing my side. Things escalated when my parents called a family meeting at their house. They invited everyone, siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, you name it. I knew skipping it would make things worse, so I showed up reluctantly, already dreading what was coming. The living room was packed. My mom started the meeting by listing all the ways they'd sacrificed for me. She recounted every overtime shift my dad worked, every vacation they skipped, and every small financial struggle they faced. She even brought up how they paid for my college textbooks and how much they gave up to ensure I had opportunities. My dad followed up, his voice heavy with disappointment. "Alex, we're not asking for much. Just a little acknowledgement. A small share in the business. Is that too much to ask after everything we've done for you?" I couldn't hold back any longer. "Dad, I've always been grateful for what you and Mom did for me. But this business? It's not something you built. I worked for years, took risks, and made sacrifices of my own. This isn't about gratitude. It's about boundaries." My sister Megan jumped in, rolling her eyes. "Here we go again with the self-made man speech. You wouldn't even have the discipline to run a business if it weren't for Mom and Dad raising you." I turned to her, feeling my frustration boiling over. "Megan, you've never once asked me about my business. You don't even know what I sell." She crossed her arms, defiant. Maybe I didn't want to interfere. But now that it's successful, why shouldn't the family benefit? You wouldn't even have this work ethic without our parents. My cousin Eric, always one to stir the pot, chimed in. "Alex, you're acting like you did this all by yourself. Don't forget how much Grandpa helped you with advice when you were starting out." I glared at him. "Advice doesn't pay bills, Eric. I appreciate Grandpa's wisdom, but let's not rewrite history. He didn't put up any money or take on any risk." My mom, clearly upset, started crying. "I just don't understand how you can be so heartless," she sobbed. "We've always been there for you, Alex. And now you're treating us like strangers." My dad's voice was stern. "You've changed, Alex. Success has made you cold. You think you're too good for your family now." I looked around the room, seeing judgment in nearly every face. No one seemed to understand what I was trying to say. It wasn't about being ungrateful. It was about standing up for something I built with my own hands. The room was tense, and the conversation was going in circles. Every explanation I offered was met with defensiveness or outright hostility. The meeting ended with everyone more divided than ever. My parents were furious, and my siblings were clearly on their side. I left their house feeling completely isolated, the weight of the situation crushing me. Over the next few days, the fallout spread even further. My parents continued telling relatives that I was selfish and ungrateful. They even took to social media, posting cryptic messages about family betrayal and how money changes people. I started getting messages from distant relatives I hadn't seen in years, criticizing me for not helping the family. Through it all, I've stayed firm. This isn't about rejecting my family. It's about maintaining control over something I've worked my whole life to build. But the constant pressure, the gossip, and the emotional manipulation are taking their toll. I don't know how to navigate this anymore. My parents see my success as something they're entitled to, but for me, it's a deeply personal achievement. I'm standing my ground, but I feel more isolated than ever. Reddit, if anyone's been through something similar, I'd appreciate your advice. Hey Reddit, it's Alex again. Things with my family have spiraled even further, and this time, it wasn't just a tense argument. It was an outright ambush. My parents invited me to what they described as a family meeting, but when I arrived, it became clear they had other plans. I showed up at their house to find the living room filled with more people than I expected. Relatives I hadn't seen in years, like Uncle Mike and Aunt Diane, were there, along with my siblings, cousins, and parents. It was immediately clear this wasn't a casual gathering. It felt like some kind of intervention. My dad wasted no time getting started. As soon as I sat down, he stood up and said, "Alex, we need to have a serious talk about your obligations to this family." Before I could even respond, Uncle Mike jumped in. "Your parents have done so much for you, Alex. Don't you think it's time you gave something back? They've worked their whole lives to give you opportunities, and now you're just turning your back on them." I tried to interject, but then Aunt Diane cut me off. "You're acting like you built everything on your own, but your parents sacrificed so much to support you. Without them, you wouldn't be where you are today." The room seemed to erupt all at once. Everyone had something to say. My mom sat there, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, while my dad looked at me like I was some ungrateful child who needed to be lectured. Every time I tried to speak, someone else would cut me off with another accusation. My cousin Eric, always eager to jump into the drama, added his 2 cents. "You know, Alex, a business is nothing without a foundation, and that foundation is family. You should be ashamed of yourself." I finally managed to raise my voice above the chaos. "Enough. I've worked my entire life to build this business. None of you were there when I was working 16-hour days, drowning in debt, or struggling just to make ends meet. This isn't a family business. It's mine. I'm not handing it over." My mom started crying harder. "We're not asking for everything, Alex. We just want to be a part of it. Your father and I deserve to share in what you've built." At that point, I tried to make a compromise. "Fine. If this is about money, I'll set up a fund for you and Dad. $10,000 a month, every month. You can use it however you want." For a moment, the room went quiet. I thought maybe they'd finally see reason. But then my dad shook his head. "That's not enough. We don't want your money. We want to own a piece of the business. This is about legacy, Alex, not a handout." The shouting started again, louder this time. My sister Megan called me selfish, saying I'd forgotten everything our parents did for me. Aunt Diane muttered something about how success changes people, while Uncle Mike accused me of being greedy. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Every person in that room seemed to think they had a claim to what I'd worked so hard to build. I stood up, trying to get control of the situation. "You all need to understand something. This business isn't up for discussion. I built it. I took the risks. And I'm not going to hand it over to satisfy some warped sense of entitlement." The room erupted again, but I'd had enough. I walked out, leaving behind a chorus of accusations and disappointed looks. My parents refused to accept my compromise, and now they've doubled down, telling even more relatives that I'm selfish and ungrateful. I don't know what to do anymore. Every time I think this can't get worse, they find a way to escalate things even further. Reddit, if anyone's been through something like this, I could really use your advice. Hey Reddit, it's Alex again. At this point, my family drama has hit an entirely new level. What started as arguments and emotional manipulation has now entered the legal arena. I had no choice but to take steps to protect what I built, but those actions have only escalated the conflict further. Let me break it down for you. After the chaos of the so-called family intervention, I knew I couldn't let the situation linger. My parents, Jack and Linda, weren't going to back down, and their insistence on owning part of my business had only grown louder. I realized I needed to take proactive steps to protect myself, so I reached out to a lawyer. A friend of mine recommended a guy named Adam, who specialized in business law, and I booked a consultation right away. Adam was blunt, but professional. After I laid out the situation, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You've got a real mess on your hands, Alex. But the good news is, if the business is structured properly, there's no way they can touch it. Have you ever added their names to any contracts, or signed anything giving them rights to ownership?" "Absolutely not," I replied. "The business has been solely under my name since day one." "Good," Adam said. "Then we'll make sure it stays that way. First, we'll review all the business documentation to ensure there are no loopholes. Then we'll strengthen your legal protection in case this escalates. It was a relief to hear him say that, but it also made me nervous. Deep down, I knew taking these steps would only make my parents angrier, but I had no choice. Adam worked quickly, reviewing my LLC documents, trademarks, and contracts. He even suggested filing additional paperwork to reinforce my sole ownership in case anyone tried to contest it in the future. It didn't take long for my parents to find out. My mom called me one afternoon, her voice shaking with anger. "Alex, what the hell are you doing? You hired a lawyer? Are you seriously trying to cut us out of the family?" I sighed, already exhausted from the conversation I knew was coming. "Mom, I'm not cutting you out of anything. I'm protecting my business. You and Dad have made it clear you want a stake in something I built, and I need to make sure everything is secure." Her voice grew sharper. "Secure from what? From us? We're your parents, Alex. How could you betray us like this?" "It's not a betrayal, Mom. It's a precaution. This business is my livelihood. I can't risk losing it because of family disagreements." The phone call ended in tears and yelling, but the fallout didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I started hearing from relatives again, this time even more aggressive than before. My Uncle Mike, who always seemed to have an opinion on everything, called to berate me. "You're lawyering up against your own parents? Do you have any idea how bad this looks, Alex? Family comes first." My Aunt Diane wasn't far behind, sending me a long-winded text about how my actions were cold and unforgivable. She claimed my parents had done nothing but support me my entire life, and that I was treating them like strangers. A week later, things reached a new low. My parents called me over to their house for a discussion. I was hesitant but went anyway, hoping we could at least have a civil conversation. When I arrived, they were sitting at the dining room table with a folder of papers in front of them. My dad gestured for me to sit down. "What's this about?" I asked, already on edge. My mom pushed the folder toward me. "These are our terms," she said, her voice cold. "We've talked it over, and we've decided that the only fair solution is for you to add our names to the business documents. We're asking for 50% ownership." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You're joking, right?" I said, flipping through the papers. They'd even drafted a mock agreement outlining their supposed rights to the business. "This isn't a joke, Alex," my dad said firmly. "We've put in just as much effort as you have, if not more. We deserve this." I laughed bitterly. "You've got to be kidding me. I worked 16-hour days, took on massive debt, and sacrificed everything to build this business. You weren't there when I was struggling to pay the bills. And now you think you're entitled to half of it?" My mom's eyes welled up with tears. "We've supported you in every way possible, Alex. If it weren't for us, you wouldn't even be where you are. This isn't just about money. It's about respect and acknowledgement." I stood up, shaking my head. "No, this is about control, and I'm not giving it to you." Things only escalated from there. My parents started calling family members to tell them about the betrayal. According to them, I was turning my back on my roots and treating them like enemies. I started getting even more hostile messages from relatives, some of them threatening to boycott my business entirely. My dad even went as far as to call one of my suppliers, claiming he had a right to know about my unethical behavior. Adam, my lawyer, assured me that their demands had no legal basis. "They can yell and scream all they want, Alex, but the law is on your side. Just don't let them intimidate you into signing anything." Still, the emotional toll was enormous. Every day, it felt like I was fighting a war on multiple fronts, defending my business, managing my family's outrage, and trying to maintain some semblance of a normal life. At this point, I don't know how much more of this I can take. Reddit, if anyone has been through something like this, please let me know how you handled it. I'm running out of options. Hey Reddit, it's Alex again. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my parents found a new way to escalate our conflict. This time, they've taken their grievances to social media, dragging my name through the mud and turning family and friends against me. The fallout has been overwhelming, and it's clear they're not stopping anytime soon. Let me explain what's been happening. It started subtly at first. My parents, Jack and Linda, posted vague statuses about how success can change people and how some individuals forget their family values when they make it big. I noticed these posts popping up on their accounts a few days after I refused their demand to give them 50% ownership of my business. Initially, I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just their way of venting. But the posts kept coming, and they got more pointed. My mom posted a photo of our family from years ago with the caption, "Back when family meant something." Some people forget who helped them when they needed it most. My dad shared a long rant about how he and my mom had sacrificed everything for their children, only to be shut out when it mattered most. It didn't take long for people to figure out they were talking about me. Relatives and old family friends started commenting on the posts, some of them expressing sympathy for my parents, while others started calling me out directly. My Aunt Diane wrote, "Jack and Linda, you're amazing parents. Don't let Alex treat you like this. He needs to be reminded where he came from." A former neighbor chimed in, "It's disgusting how money can make people so selfish. Stay strong." The situation exploded when my parents started posting screenshots of text messages and emails we'd exchanged during our arguments. They cropped them to make me look like a cold, ungrateful son, leaving out any context or explanation. One screenshot showed me saying, "The business is mine, and I'm not giving it up," without any of the preceding conversation where they demanded ownership. This was when people really started taking sides. My cousin Eric, who had always been vocal during family meetings, took to his own Facebook account to post, "It's sad when someone values money over family. We all know who I'm talking about." Meanwhile, my sister Megan shared my parents' posts, adding her own comments about how I'd lost sight of what's really important. Not everyone was against me, though. A few of my closer friends and relatives started defending me online. My cousin Sarah, who had supported me during the earlier family meetings, commented on one of my dad's posts, "This isn't fair to Alex. He worked hard for what he has, and he doesn't owe anyone a piece of it." My best friend, Ryan, went even further, writing, "Jack and Linda, this is your son you're talking about. Maybe stop airing your dirty laundry on Facebook and have a real conversation with him." But their support only seemed to pour fuel on the fire. My parents responded to Sarah, accusing her of being too young to understand family obligations. They replied to Ryan, saying, "You don't know the full story, so stay out of it." The division started affecting people in real life, too. At one point, I got a call from my friend Emily, who told me she'd been approached by a mutual acquaintance, Sarah B., who was spreading rumors about me. "She said your parents are devastated and that you're being completely unreasonable," Emily told me. I tried to set her straight, but it's clear she's already made up her mind. Even my professional life wasn't immune. One of my suppliers, Carl, mentioned during a phone call that he'd seen my mom's posts. "Hey, I don't mean to pry," he said, "but is everything okay? Your family seems pretty upset." I had to spend 10 minutes reassuring him that my personal drama wasn't going to affect our business relationship. One of the worst moments came when I attended a friend's birthday party, hoping to get a break from all the chaos. Instead, I ran into my cousin Eric, who wasted no time confronting me in front of everyone. "So, Alex," he said loudly, "how does it feel to be the family villain? Are you enjoying all that money while your parents are struggling?" I tried to brush him off, but he wouldn't let it go. "You think you're so self-made, don't you? Newsflash, no one does it alone. Your parents deserve better than this." The entire room went silent, and I felt like all eyes were on me. I finally snapped, "Eric, you have no idea what you're talking about. My parents are the ones dragging my name through the mud, not the other way around. If you want to believe their version of the story, go ahead, but don't come at me with your half-baked opinions." He backed off after that, but the damage was done. The party felt ruined, and I left early, exhausted, and humiliated. The division in the family has become impossible to ignore. My parents have rallied most of the older relatives to their side, while a handful of my cousins and friends have stuck with me. The constant back and forth on social media has made it clear that this isn't going to resolve itself anytime soon. To make matters worse, my parents have now started reaching out to people in my professional circle, trying to undermine me further. My mom emailed one of my business partners, subtly implying that I was unstable and that she was worried about the future of the company. Thankfully, my partner saw through it and called me immediately to let me know what was happening. I'm at a breaking point. The social and emotional pressure is relentless, And it feels like my parents won't stop until they've destroyed my reputation entirely. I've been thinking about cutting them off completely, but that decision feels like crossing a line I can never come back from. Reddit, if anyone has been through something like this, please tell me how you handled it. I'm desperate for advice. Hey Reddit, it's Alex again. I've reached the point where there's no turning back. After months of relentless pressure, manipulation, and public humiliation from my parents and some of my family, I've made the hardest decision of my life. I've cut them off completely. It's not something I ever imagined doing, but they pushed me to the edge, and now I have to pick up the pieces of my life. Here's how it happened. After their social media campaign turned into an all-out smear fest, I realized things were never going to get better. My parents weren't just venting their frustrations. They were actively trying to ruin my reputation, both personally and professionally. The comments, the posts, the messages, it was endless. Even with the few supportive voices from friends and relatives, the constant negativity was eating away at me. Every time my phone buzzed, I braced myself for another message or notification that would ruin my day. The breaking point came when I got a call from one of my suppliers, Carl. He'd received an email from my mom, claiming that I was mentally unstable and warning him to keep an eye on my business dealings. Thankfully, Carl trusted me enough to let me know what was going on, but the humiliation of having to explain the situation to him was unbearable. It was clear that my parents weren't just upset. They were trying to sabotage me. I decided to consult my lawyer, Adam, again. Adam, I said during one of our meetings, I can't live like this anymore. They're everywhere, on social media, in my professional circles. I feel like I'm constantly looking over my shoulder. Adam leaned back in his chair and sighed. You've done everything right from a legal perspective, Alex, but this isn't just a legal problem. This is personal, and it's toxic. If you want my honest advice, you need to create some serious boundaries. That might mean cutting contact entirely. The idea hit me like a ton of bricks. Cut contact? With my parents? It felt unthinkable. But as I drove home that day, I couldn't stop thinking about how much better my life might be if I didn't have to deal with their constant attacks. By the time I got home, I'd made up my mind. The next morning, I blocked my parents and siblings on all social media platforms. Then, I blocked their phone numbers. It wasn't an easy decision, but I knew it was the only way to protect my mental health and my business. At first, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. But that relief didn't last long. Within days, I started hearing from mutual friends and relatives who were angry that I'd abandoned my parents. My mom apparently called my Aunt Diane in tears, saying I'd cut them out of my life without warning and accusing me of being cruel and heartless. Diane, of course, wasted no time calling me to give me a piece of her mind. How could you do this to your parents? She demanded. They've done nothing but love and support you. And this is how you repay them? I didn't have the energy to argue. Diane, I said, this isn't your business. My parents have crossed every boundary imaginable, and I'm done. End of story. She hung up on me, and I knew I just lost another family connection. The final straw came a week later. I was sitting in my office, going over some quarterly reports, when my assistant, Julia, knocked on my door. Alex, she said cautiously, your parents are here. I froze. What do you mean, here? I asked. They're in the lobby, she replied. They're asking to see you. They're being persistent. My heart started racing. Don't let them in, I said firmly. Call security if you have to. A few minutes later, I heard the commotion from down the hall. My parents were arguing with the security guards, loudly demanding to be led upstairs. My dad's voice boomed through the lobby. I'm his father. I have every right to see him. My mom's voice followed, shrill and angry. We just want to talk to him. This is ridiculous. I stayed in my office, feeling a mix of anger, embarrassment, and sadness. I couldn't believe it had come to this. My parents showing up unannounced, making a scene in front of my employees. Eventually, the guards escorted them out of the building, but not before my mom yelled, "You can't avoid us forever, Alex. We're your family." After they left, Julia came back into my office. Are you okay? She asked gently. Yeah, I lied. Thanks for handling that. But the truth was, I wasn't okay. I spent the rest of the day replaying the scene in my head, wondering how things had gotten so bad. Blocking them had felt like the right move, but now I wasn't so sure. Still, I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let them back into my life. Their behavior was toxic, and it was destroying me. Since then, things have been quiet. My parents haven't tried to contact me directly, but I know they're still talking to other family members, spinning their version of the story. My Aunt Diane sent me a long email, begging me to reconcile with them, but I didn't respond. I'm done explaining myself. For the first time in months, I feel like I can breathe. But the sadness is still there, lurking in the background. Cutting off my family wasn't something I wanted to do. It was something I had to do. Reddit, if you've been through something similar, I could really use some advice. How do you cope with the guilt and the loss? How do you move forward? It had been months since I had last spoken to my parents. The silence was deafening at first, but over time, I learned to appreciate it. No arguments, no accusations, no social media drama. It was peaceful. I focused on my work, rebuilt some of my friendships that had been strained by the family drama, and started to feel like myself again. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about them. As angry as I was, they were still my parents, and part of me hoped they'd eventually see things from my perspective. That day came sooner than I expected. One afternoon, as I was sifting through the usual pile of business mail, I noticed a familiar handwriting on an envelope. It was from my mom. For a moment, I debated whether to open it. Part of me feared it was another guilt trip or veiled demand, but curiosity got the better of me. I tore it open and pulled out the letter inside. It began simply, "Dear Alex, we're sorry." I read the letter carefully, my heart racing. My mom's words were apologetic but measured. She acknowledged that they had overstepped and let their emotions cloud their judgment. She admitted that their actions had hurt me and made it clear that they didn't want to lose me completely. "We know we've made mistakes," she wrote, "but we want to try to make things right. If you're willing, we'd like to meet and talk, on your terms." I set the letter down and stared at it for a long time. I wasn't sure what to feel, relief, suspicion, or maybe just exhaustion. After everything that had happened, could I really trust their intentions? I decided to take a few days to think about it. I spoke to a few close friends and even my lawyer, Adam, about the letter. Adam was skeptical. "They've caused you a lot of grief, Alex. If you decide to meet with them, make sure you have clear boundaries." Ryan, my best friend, was more optimistic. "Look, man, they're your parents. Maybe they've finally realized they were wrong. It doesn't mean you have to forgive everything, but maybe this is a chance to move forward." Eventually, I decided to give them the benefit of the doubt, but I wasn't going to let them waltz back into my life without setting some ground rules. I wrote them a short reply, agreeing to meet but making my expectations clear. "If we're going to rebuild our relationship, you need to respect my independence and stay out of my business. I'm willing to talk, but I won't tolerate any more interference." We arranged to meet at a neutral location, a quiet cafe on the edge of town. I arrived early, nerves twisting in my stomach. I hadn't seen my parents in months, and I had no idea what to expect. When they walked in, I was struck by how tired they looked. My dad's usual confident demeanor was subdued, and my mom's face was lined with worry. We exchanged awkward hellos before sitting down. For a few minutes, none of us said anything, the silence stretching uncomfortably. Finally, my dad cleared his throat. "Alex, we want to start by saying we're sorry." "Truly?" My mom nodded, her voice trembling as she spoke. "We let our pride get in the way. We were so caught up in what we thought was right that we didn't stop to consider how it was affecting you." I crossed my arms, not ready to let my guard down just yet. "You didn't just affect me. You tried to ruin my reputation, my relationships, even my business. That's not something I can just forget." My dad looked down at his hands. "We know, Alex, and we'll regret it for the rest of our lives. We were wrong. We see that now." The conversation was tense but productive. They admitted that their behavior had been driven by fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of losing their connection to me. "It was never about the money," my mom said quietly. "We just didn't know how to let go. We see now that we went about it the wrong way." I listened carefully, looking for any sign of manipulation or hidden agendas, but for once, they seemed genuine. They didn't make excuses, and they didn't try to shift the blame. By the end of the meeting, I felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, we could move forward. But I wasn't ready to fully trust them yet. If we're going to have a relationship, I said firmly, there have to be rules. You can't interfere in my business. At all. And if you start spreading stories about me again, this is over. They both nodded. We understand, my dad said. We just want to be a part of your life again. Over the next few weeks, we started to rebuild our relationship, slowly and cautiously. My parents made an effort to respect my boundaries, and I began to see glimpses of the people they were before all the drama. They even made amends with some of the relatives who had taken their side during the conflict, acknowledging that they had misled them about what had happened. There were still moments of tension, and I remained vigilant, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like things might actually be okay. I'm not naive. I know that trust takes time to rebuild, and I'm not ready to let my guard down completely. But for now, we've found a fragile peace, and that's more than I ever thought possible.